Roxie, my next question is about your embrace of the app form and how illustrating for apps is different than illustrating for picture books. What do artists need to know in terms of dots per inch and dimensions in creating the art? And what is it that your company does to help others create apps? Because I know that you also have a separate company that helps others.
The way I got into this, I'll digress briefly and say that this book, which is the Dutch version of Mazescapes, Doolhof, my favorite name, I got an email about 8 years ago from a guy on behalf of his son, like a fan letter, and I sent him a maze back, and that was it. 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I heard from him, and he wanted to get into apps. He ran a graphics company. Did I want to get into apps? And I'm like, yes, perfect. So I will show you some of the art in a moment. So we work together as partners. So it's not really my company at all, but I am in partnership with my apps with him. And also, you could say I'm a partner more than that because a couple of my other clients have worked with this company. And he has this wonderful service called DYO, Develop Your Own, where you give the assets, the art, the VO, the music, or you don't have to, he can supply those. Send those to him, and he will put together a fabulous app, and it's like half the price that it would be if you went to a developer and said, just do this from scratch. To go back to the art of it, I've done 2 apps with him. One is based upon the Doors book. I got the rights back from my publisher Chronicle when the book went out of print, and I got the electronic files, the scans back, which are very important. So I got them back, and they were very high quality, and I was able to upload them to this guy's in the Netherlands, in a Dutch company. So that book went rather smoothly. I did a bunch of spots for it. Here's some of the spots I do where a dragon's flying. These are the back side of some of the doors. I don't know how many spots.
And can you explain what a spot is?
Oh, a spot is and this is for the space shuttle you can see, and up in the sky we're going to see some flying around. And a spot is an area in the app that you want to have animated. You really don't have to do each motion. Like if someone's raising their arm, you don't have to do every increment of it. They're so good now with Photoshop, you can do 1, 2, 3, and they will be able to adapt it from there.
And that's an isolated piece of art, that arm.
And now we'll get into the big job, which was the first one, which is the Maze app. I did this gigantic,
oh my God,
back-breaking, huge. It was really quite challenging. I have some pictures. Huge illustration, which the logistics of which were quite complex because, as you know, you can't hold an ink pen up like this and work. So I had to lie on the table, put it on a big board, and ink it in. Now, what you have to do to go back to your question, the size of it, this is for the iPad, and also we did it for the iTouch and the iPhone. So I think I did them about 6.5 by 8 inches. But because this is a continuous maze, this was broken up into 16 screens. I had to take this to a very high-end scanner to be scanned. I mean, there were only 2 or 3 places in New York, which is a big place, where they could scan this, a museum scanner. It cost like $500. They had to scan it one gigantic 300 to 500 DPI. The smaller scans, by the way, here's, for instance, the balloon going up. The smaller scans I did at a scale that I could scan on my scanner, scan them to size, and again, it has to be very good. It has to be 300 DPI. And you had to figure out I had to make a slightly fatter ink pen because don't forget it's reduced to fit on the little iPad thing. So you had to calculate so that your ink line didn't look real gigantic compared to the reduced ink line on the iPad, on the iPad screen.
And let me just interrupt. And so Roxie's just saying the words ink line. So it's the width of your ink line.
The black lines. If they're too skinny, they won't look right when the animation is done. They have to match the original animation.
So that outline gets bigger as you enlarge and smaller as you reduce it. Thank you. And you need to keep that consistent. So that's the particular challenge that Roxie is talking about there.
And also, another fact that you guys should know is that some art lends itself better than other art. And Omar, my guy in the Netherlands, knew that my art is not easy to animate, but because it has black lines around it, and I use black lines rather than a more painterly stroke. A painterly stroke is not as easy to carve out the animation and not as easy to animate as if you use a black outline, which kind of makes sense.
Yes.
So my work did lend itself very, very well to animation. So, and then I've done these are just other animations for I'm doing a castle thing, little animations for that. But to go back to your question about what kind of art, my point is that I wouldn't say I'm very bored with cartoony, computerized cartoons. I think they're just so done. But you do need to it is useful to have a black line and have things delineated. It is much easier. And also, for the iPad, for young children, bright colors is, cool.
Or have solid colored objects. Because what Roxie's talking about is having a very clearly delineated object. And the black outline will do that, or also having solid colored objects will do that as well.
A distinct difference between foreground, background, that sort of thing. You got it.
And Roxie, can you repeat the measurements of what the original art should be? 7 inches by 8 inch?
I don't have it in front of me, but it is the size of the iPad. Basically, the iPad, that's the other issue you see. The iPad, if you're doing it for the iPad, it should be the iPad screen proportion minus a strip for the toolbar, right? So it's maybe a ½ inch strip. If you're doing it for the Kindle Fire is a more horizontal format. So you will need a more horizontal. That's one of the problems and one of the reasons why publishers are not embracing apps more wholeheartedly is that there's so many different devices and they all have different proportioned screens. Wow. So you have to make my iPad app is not going to work on a Kindle Fire. Not only because of the operating system, but even the proportions are not going to work on the Kindle Fire because the Kindle Fire is longer and skinnier. So each, all these devices they're creating, the Nook, they all have slightly different proportions. It's quite a nightmare, and that is one reason publishers, along with the pricing model, are not embraced, and the marketing issues, are not embracing apps the way we want them to. I mean, I really think, to go back to the future of children's publishing, that I love print, but in 20 or 30 years, the average household, the average house, will probably not have a bookshelf. A child who's 18 months or 2 years old right now already knows how to, I was in Sweden, the little 18-month-old child is already using an iPhone and an iPad. It's very intuitive to them. This is going to be their future, whether we like it or not. There will be books, always. They will be in museums, they will be in libraries, and they'll be in homes of collectors. But the average person and the average school is probably not going to, they won't have that many books around.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that because I think there's a whole class system in terms of affordability for the devices themselves that's not being addressed at all. There's no discussion about that happening. And who knows what the future holds. I mean, we may not have any kind of devices at all. It might all just be plugged right into our brains.
Right.
But
Like
for
it-
now and the near future, apps is definitely a growing medium and something to consider. To tangible books. And also, when I was doing my PhD, I looked into studies about screen time and brain activity with children. And it's not good.
No, studies have shown that if there's too much interactivity, they don't learn. There are too many bells and whistles. But the thing is, to make it a little more optimistic for we who create children's books, there will always have to be content, and there will always have to be good apps, good material. So they'll still need illustrators and writers. I mean, you'll always need it. It's just shifting a little bit into a different medium.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, this has been such a juicy conversation. I've absolutely loved it. I just want to go back for a second. And you were talking about, the really computer graphic-y looking stuff on apps. And that stuff has a tendency to look really cheap.
Yeah.
And it really, I think, brings down the respect for the form because of that cheap look. And so for you guys, my darling students, I really encourage you, if you want to work digitally, do it in more sophisticated ways.
Yes.
Import textures and work with them. Make yourself a texture library that you create in watercolor or acrylics and bring those in so that it's not the Photoshop, filled.
So it's more individualistic looking, shows your own style. When my first app came out, a lot of the reviewers are like, wow, they're hand drawn. I mean, there's like been this backlash against computer stuff now into the more handcrafted work. So I do encourage all the artists to stay with it and to stay with your own individual line and look.
Yes, so that we see the hand of the artist.
Yeah, this generic computer thing is like, yeah. So tired of seeing fat little figures with little, they all look the same.
Roxie, thank
I'm
you.
very excited and so glad to meet all your great students. And, feel free to email me, folks.